All right, hey, and welcome everybody. This is Pastor Sherman Ray, and welcome back to In God We Still Trust. I want to hope you guys, everybody's doing well today. This podcast is all about faith, freedom, and our American heritage, and where they come together like red, white, and blue. I'm your host, Sherman Ray, pastor of Sagestone Church and founder of In God We Still Trust, the podcast. And today, we're going to dive into a story, guys. This is really very interesting. This is a first, okay, and I don't think I've ever seen it anyplace else before. So it's a story that's almost been erased from the pages of history until now. So you're going to hear something today that you probably have never heard before, and I hope that you're able to share it with all of your friends. It's a story of pastors who didn't just preach the gospel. No, they fought for liberty. The British feared them. The colonialists followed them, and they were called the Black Regiment. Yeah, this is going to be very cool. I know when people first saw the promo for this thing, they were thinking, "Oh gosh, what is this? If you're talking about black folks or something like that." No, these were called Black Regiment because of the robes that they wore. This is very good. And if you're a pastor listening today, let me just say right before we get started, this is for you. Okay, this episode is for you. So, if you're listening to this right now and you've got a pastor friend of yours that needs to hear this, you guys, go get them right now. Okay. And when we get back, guys, we are going to talk about those that Black Regiment here on In God We Still Trust. I'll be back in just a second. Okay. All right, folks, the Black Regiment. This is something I was just thinking about this. The biggest thing, the reason why we started, In God We Still Trust, and a lot of the other podcasts we do as a part of S-Ray Media, is to get pastors off of their sweet by and by, and get them back into the business of doing church work. And that means more than just preaching the gospel from the pulpit. It's actually getting involved in the culture. And so when I came across this story, I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to share this. And I did some research on it. Cannot wait to share it with you. But before we get too far going, I want you to do one thing for me. Go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Yeah, go ahead and subscribe to our channel, because we're going to try to get these up at least once a week. But when we do, you need to know when we get these up. So go ahead and subscribe. And then secondly, share this. Okay, share this with all your friends. Let them know, hey guys, guess what? I was listening to this thing called In God We Still Trust, and I think it's just fantastic. Also, you can follow us on Facebook. We're on Instagram, and we've got you can also get this on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. So just go ahead and look for In God We Still Trust. So let's start talking about the Black Regiment. It wasn't a formal military unit. It was a movement. And this is really important. This will all make so much sense in just a couple minutes here. A spiritual force of fire-breathing pastors who saw the American Revolution not as a political rebellion, no, but as a biblical responsibility. They didn't see that these settlers who are coming to these colonists who are coming to these lands, that they didn't see it as a rebellion, a political rebellion. They said this was a spiritual mandate, because guess what, guys? If you've been following this for any length of time, you probably understand and you probably remember that the reason why this American experiment was even founded was because of men and women who believed that they had a mandate from God to spread the gospel in this new land. And that's why it was here. It's not, King George, wonderful. He's a great guy and stuff like that. And King Edward and those guys are great guys. But the colonists themselves were here because of a spiritual mandate, and that's what these pastors believed also. You see, colonial America was deeply rooted in the Bible. Most homes had a Bible and a musket. Did a twofer there. And behind many pulpits stood pastors wearing their black clerical robes, preaching not just salvation from sin, but freedom from tyranny. Yeah, and I think, as a pastor myself, now I do this all the time. I talk about tyranny, and I talk about people moving together, but that's not always in the truth in all churches. You see, in some churches, all they talk about is how to be a better person, that kind of stuff, but they don't really talk about us going into the culture and influencing the culture, and that's where things change. And this is what these pastors of old believed. The British even blamed clerical people for stoking the flames of independence. One British governor wrote to London saying, "If you ask me who is the most responsible for this rebellion, I'll tell you, I know it is. It's those Black Robe Regiment. It's those guys in the pulpits." Wouldn't that be... Wouldn't you... Here's the thing. I got to stop for a second. Wouldn't you love to be blamed in your community for public outrage over abortion in your community? Wouldn't your church... Wouldn't you as a pastor, wouldn't you love your congregation to be blamed for the end of homelessness or the end of brothels, or the end of Skid Row in your... You see, in California, folks, they are number one in homelessness. They're number one in all these crazy things, and yet they've got so many people and so many churches there. Wouldn't it be great if these churches were blamed for ending homelessness in California? That's what this is all about, you guys. It's really about mobilizing your pastors to get off their sweet by-and-bys and become part of the Black Regiment, the Black Robe Regiments. These weren't pew-warming preachers. No, they weren't. They were warriors in the spirit, and sometimes in the flesh. And we're going to talk about this in just a second, folks. I cannot wait for you to hear about some of the things that some of these guys did. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of these Black Robe Regiment pastors and what they did to change their culture. And we'll do that in just a second. We'll be right back, folks. And we are back. Pastor Sherman Ray, and this is In God We Still Trust. I hope that you guys are getting something out of this broadcast this morning. Once again, this is probably something you've never heard before about these pastors. You'll never have heard this before, and how instrumental they were in the Revolutionary War. This is pivotal. I've never heard of it anyplace else before. So guys, this is something you want to definitely share with your friends. So on the screen right now, I'm going to show you a picture of a guy by the name of Reverend John Peter Muhlenberg. One Sunday in January of 1776, he preached from Ecclesiastes 3, and it said, to everything there's a season, a time of war and a time of peace. And here's the thing about Pastor Muhlenberg. The next thing he said, and now is a time for war. You see, Pastor Muhlenberg was one of these Black Robe Regiment leaders. Right there in the sanctuary, it's been reported that he removed his black robe, revealing a full colonial army uniform underneath it. Wouldn't that be amazing, guys? Wouldn't you? Wouldn't that be amazing that your pastor's preaching the gospel and he's doing this, and then all of a sudden he goes, you know what? I'm done with this. He pounds his fist upon the lectern, and he says, guys, now is a time for war. And he rips off his jacket right there in the sanctuary, removed his black robe, revealing his full Continental Army uniform. And then he turned to his congregation and said, who will follow me? Who will follow me? He says. That day, 300 men stood, walked down the aisle, and joined the cause of liberty. Now that's an altar call, you guys. Now that's an altar call. Would that be amazing to see that happen in your church? What about this guy? This guy right here. His name is Reverend James Caldwell. And James Caldwell, they called him the fighting chaplain. During the Battle of Springfield, his troops ran out of wadding for their muskets. That stuff that they'd stick it down in the to pack in that ball inside their muskets, and they ran out of that wadding for their muskets. And he dashed into a nearby church, grabbed hymnals by Isaac Watts, and yelled, get this. So he goes in, he grabs a hymnal by Isaac Watts, and he goes, give them Watts, boys! And he starts ripping the pages out of the Bible. He starts ripping the pages out of the Bible and gives them to his men to use as wadding for their muskets. Pages of hymns were literally used to fire at the enemy. Imagine using your Sunday bulletin. This is great. Your Sunday bulletin as a battlefield ammunition. Isn't that amazing? Most folks didn't bring their Bibles to church anymore, right? This guy, he got the hymnal book out and goes, that's amazing. Finally, there's this guy. His name is Jonas Watts. Jonas Watts. Reverend Jonas Clark, excuse me. He pastored in Lexington. Pastored in Lexington and in Massachusetts, where the first shots of the Revolution rang out. I want you to get this. This is interesting. The Minutemen who faced off the British. Yeah, I know you're starting to think about this. Yeah, that's correct. They were men from his church, trained in Scripture, grounded in truth, inspired by the pulpit. Reverend Clark said this. He said, from this day will be dated the liberty of the world. That's powerful, you guys. I mean, that is just simply powerful. Can you imagine, excuse me, that these pastors, these men of the pulpit, these men of the cloth, these men who preached, they preached a lot of peace and stuff like that, but they understood. They had a mandate. And pastors, you have a mandate. You have a mandate with your culture wherever you're at. We've got a mandate right now in America, guys. But we've been watching the world go by for decades. Literally decades. We've been watching the world go by. We're going to talk a little bit about this in the next segment. And I hope that during the break, if you've not gotten to your pastor yet, call him on the phone. Say, Pastor, you've got to listen to this. You've got to listen to this guy on this podcast called In God We Still Trust. And when we come back, we're going to talk about why these pastors mattered and why you as a pastor matter. On our next segment, we'll be right back in just a second, folks, for more of In God We Still Trust. Alrighty, guys. Why do pastors matter? Why do pastors really matter in the whole scheme of things? And this is probably a question that's probably been asked many, many times before. Does it really matter whether you say something, whether you do something or not? Well, yes, it does. You matter so much in the grand scheme of things. So why were pastors such a big deal in the revolution? Well, because they taught liberty from the pulpit. They taught liberty from the pulpit. What do we mean by liberty? Well, we mean God's purpose for you in this life, and God's plan for you in this life. And that you being in this new land, that you were given such freedoms, and that you were not to give up those freedoms for momentary conveniences. They taught liberty from the pulpit. They preached that all men were created equal, not just because a politician said so, but because God said so. And this is so important. The government doesn't give you freedoms. The government doesn't give you your inalienable rights. That comes from God above. And unless you understand that, guys, you're liable to believe that some politician gave you those rights, and they didn't. They preached that all men were created equal. They taught Romans 13 properly, that government is only legitimate. I want you to understand this, that government is only legitimate when it is a servant of good. Government is only legitimate when it is a servant of good. When government starts going awry and it starts doing crazy things like we're seeing happen, or we've seen over the last number of years in America, then government becomes illegitimate. When it becomes a servant of tyranny, it's no longer ordained by God. You see, it's almost like King Saul. Remember King Saul when he was following Samuel the prophet? Yeah, he was fine. But when he started following after people, when he started following after being a people pleaser, then all of a sudden Saul said, "You know what? You can't go on anymore like this." And the Lord told him, "Take that anointing away from him." And that's the same thing that happens in any government. When it starts becoming a government of tyranny, it's no longer ordained by God. They taught that there was a higher king, and in those days it was King George III, and his name is King Jesus. Okay? Your city official, your senator, your congressman, your president are not God. Okay? We just saw a group of people talking about it just recently, and they were saying, "Oh, it's no King's Day." Okay? Well, if anybody understands anything, okay, and I know our current president understands this, is that he serves God. He's not a king, and these people even absurdly thinking that someone else would be a king in America other than God himself is absurd. As a matter of fact, they seem to think that they are king, that they should be running the show. Okay, no, God runs the show. They baptized babies, married couples, trained militias. Their sermons stirred the soul and steeled the will. And for many, their pulpit became a recruiting station for freedom. And that's incredible. That your pulpit, can you imagine that, guys? Not only do you do all the things that you do normally, okay? You preach, yes, you exhort and you challenge, but also it becomes a recruiting station for those who are going to serve in the kingdom. And in our next segment, we're going to talk about where are those black robes at now? Where are those black robe regiments now? It's a question we all need to answer. We'll be back in just a minute. Alrighty, and I'm back. This is Pastor Sherman Ray, and this is In God We Still Trust. I hope that you're enjoying this. Some folks were asking about before, they were saying, "Hey, well, how do we get a hold of? How can we get a copy of this podcast?" Well, you can go to Apple Podcasts, you can go to Spotify. You can also check us out on our YouTube channel, which many of you are watching us on right now. And we encourage you, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We would love to have you get informed every time we have one of these broadcasts. Well, so where today, in this next segment, we're talking about where are these Black Robe Regiment pastors today? Where are they at? Let me speak to pastors right now who are listening to this broadcast. I'm speaking to you specifically, okay? We don't need you to enlist in a battlefield army. Okay, that's not what we're asking you to do today. But we do need you to suit up in courage. Just recently the IRS basically took away one of the restrictions that you and I as pastors have. And as a 501c3, we weren't able to talk about political things from our pulpit. Well, that restriction's been taken away. And so now, pastors, guess what? You have got carte blanche. You've been given the authority to go out and start talking about the things that affect the culture here on earth right now, in the physical and in the natural. Not only can you talk about things in the spiritual, but you can talk about things in the natural right now. So you need to suit up, encourage. We need pulpits on fire again. Not just sermonettes for Christianettes, come on, but the kind of bold, truth-filled, unapologetic preaching that calls a nation back to righteousness. You need to stop, you need to put your big boy pants on and start telling the truth. There's a lot of pastors out there that are just, they're going, oh, but I just want to be sweet and be lovable and everything. Okay, that's wonderful, okay? But you've been given a pulpit, you've been given a platform that was meant to change the world. You were given a pulpit and a voice and a presence and a spirit influence that was meant not just for you to make them feel good, but to make them feel uncomfortable. The Bible is not there to make people feel good. It's there to make them feel uncomfortable so they change their ways and recognize that Jesus Christ is Lord. And we as pastors, that's our job also. We don't teach sermonettes for Christianettes. We teach the Word. And it's bold. And it cuts like a knife. Because, friend, if pastors don't speak up now, who will? Who's going to speak up now? We're facing cultural tyranny, spiritual deception, moral confusion. But the answer isn't to retreat, it's to re-engage. We don't need more celebrities. We don't need any celebrity Christians. We don't need to see, another guy with a big suit on, big smile on his face, great hair, okay? We need more soldiers in the Spirit. More soldiers in the Spirit. God needs more generals out there doing their work, doing His work. If ever there was a time for a new Black Robe Regiment, it's now. And the Lord is calling on you. We'll be back in just a second. All right. Well, welcome back, folks. This is In God We Still Trust. I'm Pastor Sherman Ray, and I hope that you are enjoying this exclusive broadcast about the Black Robe Regiment. And this is just, I hope you really are. And share this with all your friends, okay? Let's get on segment 5. We're almost done here, folks. Let's be clear. We're talking about carrying the torch, guys. In this last segment, these last 2 segments about carrying the torch moving forward. Let's be clear, the Founding Fathers didn't separate church and state the way modern culture claims. In fact, they leaned heavily on the church. They trusted that moral men, guided by biblical principles, were necessary to keep liberty alive. You see, the culture in those days knew that the church was the bedrock. They knew that you and I preached this, that we knew this. And they came to us all the time. They didn't rely upon themselves and their new laws and their new gurus and their consultants. They relied upon the church for direction. We need to re-engage, guys. Benjamin Franklin himself once said, he says, only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. You see, the reason why there was a Bible and a spelling book in the early schools was so that people could understand what right and wrong were. And if the only way they were going to learn right and wrong is from reading in the Bible. They couldn't learn it from TikTok. There was none of that stuff anywhere, okay? They knew that what they needed it from the Word. So what happens when pastors go silent? Culture drifts. Truth fades. Fads come in. And tyranny creeps in. But what happens when pastors arise? Come on, you guys. Somebody's getting happy already, okay? Nations change. And we're going to talk about that in our last segment. In our last segment, we're going to find out what happens when pastors get engaged in the culture, because we need them. We need them like none other time before. We'll be back in just a second for our final segment. Okay, let's land this plane, you guys. Let's land this plane. And I hope you've enjoyed this so far. We've been talking about Black Robe Regiment and how important it is for pastors to get involved in the culture. So to every pastor, teacher, church leader, believer listening, here's my encouragement to you. Put your robe back on, guys. Put your robe back on. Not the cloth, but the calling. That's what your call is. It doesn't have anything to do with your shirt, even though it's a great shirt. We'll be talking more about how you can get one of these shirts yourself. But it's a calling. This is our moment, pastors. Not to hide in the shadows, but to stand in the light. Like the Black Robe Regiment of old, may we be known as those who preach righteousness, resist evil, and lead the charge towards the truth. Not only the truth, but freedom in God's glory. I believe God is raising up a remnant of black robe preachers again. And will you be one? That's our call to you. You guys, this has been an exciting show that we've had here, but it's really nothing unless you put it into action. If you're listening to this broadcast, I encourage you, pass it on to your pastor. Let him hear it, and hopefully it'll make a change in him. Get him fired up, because we have got such an opportunity here like we've never had before. And I encourage him or her to take hold of it as they can. Well, this has been In God We Still Trust. And where we declare boldly that America's strength has always rested not in our politics, but in God Almighty. Subscribe, share this episode, and visit us on www.godwestilltrust.com. That's godwestilltrust.com. And until next time, you guys, stand strong, preach boldly, and never forget. Okay, never forget this, guys. Our freedom is worth fighting for. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America. This has been Pastor Sherman Ray. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.